Thank you to the National Academy of Design, the curators of the show, Nato and Natalia. Thank you, Frank Dallas, for introducing me and getting all this stuff together. Thank you all for coming. I'm really happy to see you all and happy to be here, I think. I am, you know, a lot of you know me. I got myself into something. I'm thinking a lot about Jean Genet, and I want to think through it. And as some of you know, I do this, I think out loud in public, which is what I do. And so this is the start of a new project. I thought it was going to be more like an improvisation like I usually do. And it is because I haven't written anything out, but I feel like what I have to say is so dangerous that I needed all the props. And I might look at notes. I might not. Not dangerous to you, don't worry. It feels dangerous. I don't know if it's really dangerous or not, but it's new material, and so I want to think through some things about Genet. We'll go for about an hour. How many people have read Genet? Okay, lots of, oh, okay. I've read a lot since high school. My argument. So, as you know, Jean Genet was a very important French writer, born around 1910, died in 1986, wrote 5 novels, 3 plays, and then a book called Prisoner of Love, which was his last book that he wrote in the 1980s, the early 80s. And I've been reading Genet myself since I was a teenager, and I returned to Genet often and have returned to Genet repeatedly, and now I'm thinking about Genet specifically in relationship to fascism, the fascism we're experiencing now. We're at war. What does it mean to own that as a property of the first person plural? We are at war. Can that be renounced? I don't think so. Another thinker I think about, who I probably won't get into much today, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, said, some are guilty, many are guilty, but everyone's responsible. And how to deal with that responsibility if I didn't vote for the fascist president or the regime that's prosecuting this war externally, internally, is a problem. Certainly a challenge. It's an ethical challenge. It's a political challenge. Those are 2 different things, I think. Ethics and politics are, to my mind, separate categories. They certainly overlap, but are they identical, and is it useful to think of them as identical? Heschel says that some are guilty, but we're all responsible. That seems to carry politics, and it certainly did motivate political action, but I think that's an ethical principle, maybe? Or maybe that's a political principle. Maybe that's, I don't know exactly. Why ethics and politics, why are these 2 separate categories? Because well, the fundamental ethical principles that are at stake here are derived from Kant. They're were well articulated by Simone de Beauvoir in her book, Ethics of Ambiguity, which is one of my favorite books of philosophy. And the ethical imperatives are to never use an other, the other, an other, solely as a means, always recognize that the other is an end in and of themselves. They have their own desires, they have their own destinations. No one should be reduced to a means entirely. We actually use each other as means for pleasure, for companionship. We hope that this is a reciprocity. That would be an ethical dimension. That's the fundamental ethical imperative. We can't always live up to that in the realm of politics, right? Which really raises the question of violence, which Walter Benjamin dealt very well in his critique of violence, which I may or may not talk about. So I just wandered into an area that I didn't plan to talk about, although I am really thinking about Benjamin's critique of violence. So politics, often, even if you're committed to a non-violent form of politics, which is where ethics could possibly arise in the sphere of politics and political engagement, it's my experience. I'll stop speaking in the first person plural. It's my experience that my ethics and my politics are in conflict as a politically active person. I'm searching for a form of ascesis, which is why I'm talking about Jean Genet. Ascesis is related to the word asceticism, ascetic, right? Not aesthetic, but ascetic. Ascesis is a spiritual practice that is enacted through renunciation. It's a very severe form of self-discipline that entails and requires renunciation. Genet, as many of you know, thought of his project as a form of ascesis. Many commentators, like Leo Bersani, took that further. I'm a teacher, sorry. Also, I'm not an expert. I'm a highly undisciplined person. So, follow up the references. Ascesis. So, Genet understands himself to be involved in a kind of, he is involved in a very strict form of self-discipline, which involves renunciation, and almost religious. Not almost religious. Genet is religious. Right? Okay, first of all, what do we know about Genet? Genet is an avowed homosexual and criminal. He spends the first half of his life in prison or in jail, in and out of jail. He's a ward of the state. His mother was a prostitute who gave him up for adoption upon birth. Genet spends his childhood in the Morvagne, where the French state at that time is paying poor people, peasants, to take care of foster children. He is very attracted to crime and the criminal, becomes a thief, has sexual feelings around 12 or 13, in a situation where he's in institutions with boys, reformatories, prisons. This is the scene in which he rises, grows up, recognizes his homosexuality, hates the state, feels abandoned not only by his parents, but the state. It is very important to understand that Genet is a ward of the state. He's a ward of the French state. And the renunciation starts with that. Right? The renunciation also plays itself out in his sexuality, in his aesthetics, in his ethics, in his writing, most specifically. And I think it's interesting to think about the writing apart from Genet the person. Genet appears in his novels, and I'm only going to speak about the novels tonight. Again, this is a longer term project, and I've got it narrowed down to really talking about his last novel, Funeral Rites, and then his very last book, which is hard to categorize as a novel. Maybe it's autofiction, reportage. It's largely about the time he spent with the Palestine Liberation Organization in refugee camps upon their invitation in the early 1970s and then later in the early 1980s. How did Genet get to the Palestinian refugee camps in the early 1970s? He progressively, but I mean successively, came to understand his very significant political stance against the state, first as a revolt that engaged his situation and position in society as underclass, as a thief, as a sworn enemy of bourgeois values, as someone who was reviled among the oppressed, among the poor, among certainly the stigmatized, embracing his homosexuality, embracing his criminality, embracing his social position. This was the first rebellion. It was in prison when he wrote The Thieves' Journal, which was his first journal, which came to the attention of Jean Genet, who Genet had introduced himself to at some point. Genet did not have aspirations as a writer, certainly had aspirations as a writer. He introduces himself to Cocteau, and he starts writing poetry and his first novel in prison. And that's eventually how he gets out. Cocteau, Sartre, Beauvoir, a number of other French writers and intellectuals petition the state to release Genet, and that's how he gets out of prison. But he's back and forth in prison. He writes more in prison. But at some point, he's no longer practicing as a thief or not being caught. And he got to be a better thief. By his own admission, he was a terrible thief. He got caught so many times. Yeah, I started reading Genet. It was kind of mandatory queer reading in the East Village in 1983. My friends, we identified with being outsiders around sexuality, perhaps queerness. A lot of us were drug users, using very illegal drugs. Those two were among the queer, right? The queer in the 50s and 60s were drug users, a trigger announcement, dykes, faggots, thieves, communists. Queer was an umbrella term for outlaw, right? Before its reclamation in the 80s. And I was part of that generation in ACT UP who decided to use queer as rather than lesbian and gay, because queer at that time, it was not queer studies yet, it was not in academia, although I played a role in that too. It was a way of being more inclusive, particularly during the HIV epidemic, when not everyone lived in the neighborhood. We came to recognize gay as a kind of class identity. I lived in the neighborhood in Chelsea, but I had partners who did not. We came to realize also that there were not a lot of people who were going to avail themselves of safer-sex education or identify in ways that would lead them to practices that would prevent HIV transmission. So we had to come up with categories like men who have sex with other men, or injection drug users, etc. And so opening the aperture wide enough. Also, the acronym wasn't full yet. I entered the field when it was lesbian and gay, and then it gets conjugated lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer. plus center. So in that context, Genet was very enlivening, enriching, exciting. But it wasn't until recently that I started thinking about this notion of escasis and the anti-fascist potential of what Genet was onto, particularly if you consider what he did through the novels and into the plays, which I'm not going to get to, but the plays. So he writes The Balcony of the Maids and the Screens. The Screens is, so he goes from a kind of rebellion at the level of being an out homosexual inner thief to recognizing a kind of feminism, identifying as a kind of feminine person, feminized person, not necessarily a woman. He didn't identify as trans in any way, but there are many figures in his literature. This is his milieu, the queer, which is, in our language, gender nonconformist, subaltern, working class, impoverished, feminized in many different ways. If you think of the dominant power structure as masculinist and a fascist regime of male superiority, which is what we're in now, that we have different words for it, like the manosphere, the attack. I don't really need to tell you, but I'm just going to put it out there so we can think about it. You know, the attack on trans lives, the violent attack on trans lives, the scapegoating of various subjugated and oppressed groups along the lines of sexuality, gender, and class. These are all conjugated in relationship to a kind of a rule of male supremacy, which falls under the category of patriarchy. So Genet understands himself as a feminized subject, and in the novels, and particularly, all the novels, it's the femmes who are the heroes, right? It's the queens, it's the Miracle of the Rose, and even Genet's love objects are kind of like trade, like, you know, sorry. Can take the guy out of Queens. So what I'm talking about is that he liked butch guys. He really liked masculine men who were not necessarily homosexual identified. Although all of the men in the novels, also many of the men in the novels have wives or girlfriends, and they're also his lover or the lovers of the people he imagines, and that's a very fluid world that Genet lives in. But still, if they are abject, their abjection happens when they are revealed to be or recognized as feminine and passive in relationship to a dominant or dominating male. And that dominating male is not necessarily sexed male, right? So there is already in Genet an understanding that biological sex is not necessarily hinged or identical with gender, right? I think transgender theory was probably the most radical theory I will ever experience in my entire life. I heard Judith Butler read the essay on gender insubordination before it was part of gender trouble at the first LGBTQ conference. It was at Harvard or Yale. I have trouble telling the difference. But yeah, like our mind, like you could hear skulls cracking, right? When she posed the question, what if I like my girls to be boys, B-O-I. That distinction between sex, gender, and sexuality as three different distinct categories that have no necessary alignment is probably one of the most radical ideas I've been introduced to in my life. And it's what's very much at issue now, because gender insubordination and gender nonconformity are very much the violent target of our fascist repression. And it's a wedge, right? It's a wedge, it's a shifting wedge. It's a conjugation of race, class, sex, gender, sexuality, keeping the targets moving in horrifying ways, attacking specific vulnerable subjects and then moving quickly to another subject, switching. It's very divisive. I'm thinking a lot about Genet because when I talked about Genet's feminism, I'm just reporting. I have no original ideas, I just read a lot. So read Kate Millett's Sexual Politics, 1969. It's a brilliant bomb of a book. In it, she has 4 chapters on writers, Lawrence, D.H. Lawrence, Henry Miller, Mailer, and Genet. Genet is the only one who she claims for feminism. The rest are examples of male superiority, male dominance. But Genet, precisely because she comes up with this formulation that he understands how the feminized is under attack in a regime of male superiority, and understands, traces out how Genet goes from those politics, about politics in the book, to making the connection between homosexuals, criminals, the colonized, women, the working class. This is a conjugation of the liberation movements. In some ways it maps onto the conjugation of oppression that we're existing now, that we're facing now. It's not entirely a made-up conjugation. It is a description of a set of alliances that were once recognized profoundly as an organization of oppressed groups and the ways in which capitalism and patriarchy join to do exactly what's happening to us now. And so I'm reaching back into I'm 61 now, right? It's been a long time since the bar mitzvah, and I'm thinking that I'm looking for those voices. I'm looking for these conjugations and I'm also looking for it on the street too. Sometimes we find it on the street. I see some folks deeply connected to the street here. I think it's active in our avowed politics, and it's active in the practice of politics. It's also active in our ethics, but I think it's very difficult now to organize. I see some splitting. I see definitely some splitting going on in the last 15 years of the so-called lesbian and gay rights movement. If I can just paraphrase that, right? As long as we keep marriage, we're fine, and we'll just jettison the T in LGBT. That's a current gay politic now. So what's the ascesis? The ascesis is a renunciation. It's a renunciation that's in some ways impossible to effect except as a spiritual exercise. Anti-fascism has two beats, two movements. Paraphrasing the Beauvoir, Ethics of Ambiguity, 1949. First and foremost, we just oppose. We oppose the regime. It's stated. We are against the regime. We are against the regime's policies. We stand up. We do it publicly. But the more crucial move, or the equally crucial move, and the one that I am searching for, is the process by which, through ascesis, we understand that we are easily fascists. It is not enough, it is not guaranteed, because we are loud, or we have good articulation, or a great rap that against the fascists, that we ourselves are doing the work to understand that that move toward rebellion enfolds within it the possibility of fascism. That aggression, that anger, that alienation is the ground upon which we wage revolution. It's also the ground upon which we give ourselves over to fascism. Genet, in the funeral rites, let me break down funeral rites for you. Genet has a lover, a young man, named Jean, who was killed fighting the Nazis when the liberation is winning. He's on the streets, Jean is on the streets fighting the Nazis as they are fleeing at the end of World War II. And this is the beginning, the ground of funeral rites. Genet's ascesis is grief. It's grief. He keeps an empty matchbox in his pocket to fondle as if it's the coffin of Jean. And then you find Genet in Jean's mother's apartment. Sometimes he's friends with the family. And there's Juliette, the maid who is pregnant with Jean's child. And there's Jean's mother. And Jean's mother's lover, who is a Nazi soldier she's giving refuge to, as Paris is searching for the collaborators. And then there's like a half-brother, Riton, who actually went the other way and was fighting on the side of the Nazis. Genet loves them all. Genet is a prisoner of love from the earliest literature. It's love that's unbidden, but libidinal. It knows politics, but there's some other ethical principle above politics. And it's masturbatory. Riton becomes Eric, the Nazi lover. They both become Jean. Somewhere in the corner when they're all having sex, or some of them are having sex, there's the executioner. Who's the executioner? All of a sudden the executioner enters it. You get an image of someone who is masturbating and swapping faces on bodies, bodies on faces, fantasizing about all of their muscles, and deeply identifying with the mother and the maid who's pregnant with Jean's child, who later turns out to not be pregnant with Jean's child, but she still wanted the support that was being lent to her by the mother. Everyone betrays everyone else. There's much to be made about murder. In Jean Genet's literature, murder is, people murder. They have sex and they murder. How many people have seen Rainer Werner Fassbinder's movie of Corral, which was also a book, right? You remember that scene with Jean Moreau, where she sings the ballad of reading the act of jail. Each man kills the thing he loves. Right? This is also how Genet enfolds sexuality into the earthiness, the material substance of our human relations. It's fecal. There's a scene. There's a scene I can't get out of my head. It entered into my head when I was like 19. It's still, I look for it in the book. There's two, I think it's Riton and Jean, or it's like one young boy who's got a gun, who's like fighting on the side of the resistance, and another young boy who's fighting on the side of the Nazis. They're both French, and and they have sex. And they're sweaty and dirty, they haven't bathed. One reaches down into the other's pants and like picks off the dried fecal matter of the other's anus. This too is in the literature. Genet is famous for this, because he wrote, I have only read Genet in English. Bernard Beckman. I owe a tremendous debt to Bernard Beckman, the translator of all of Genet's work up until 1969, because Beckman dies. I think he committed suicide. But he also translated Beauvoir. We owe a lot to Bernard Beckman. And so I'm reading, it's amazing English writing, based on Genet's French writing. Genet draws us in because he is a brilliant writer. And that was much remarked. Sartre remarks on it in Saint Genet, his famous study of Genet, that the bourgeois would be inexorably drawn in by the beautiful language. His possession of French was so amazing that you would just be drawn in page after page to end up in scenes like this. Hot scenes. Not hot, I find them hot. We found them hot. Funeral writings inexorably leads towards sex with Hitler. Someone, a good friend of mine, asked me, how can you continue to read and reread a book throughout your life that leads to the main character ridding Hitler? Because this ascesis is about desire and its conflict with politics. Genet understands that in his youth, flip of the coin, he would have been in the resistance, or he would have fought with the Nazis. He would have been into guns. He would have been into the violence. He would have been excited by it. He would have been, and he wants to have sex with all of them. And not only sex, intimacy. Genet is a feeling writer. He loves the lovers. There is tenderness. There's tenderness in the hands and the hard bodies, whether they're resistant fighters or Nazis. There is tenderness in the body. They all have fecal matter. They all have blood and guts and intestines, and they smell, and they love smelling each other. Smell is an incredibly important aspect of Genet's literature. When Genet is in the Palestinian refugee camps and is now in love with the Fedayeen, the freedom fighters among the Palestinians, he likes to smell them taking a dump behind bushes. And I can explain that for well, it is. It's perverse. It's perverse. And it's also a form of ascesis. It's a meditation on the human body and the preciousness of the human body, and that each individual is an end in and of themselves. It's profound, and it's religious. Yeah, Genet is raised in a Catholic country. A lot of the stuff that goes on in the reformatory and the prisons, he's against bourgeois religion, but he's a believer. And it's a negative moral universe where saints are sinners and sinners are saints. It's as if he's turned a sock inside out. There is no departure from a Christian It's just completely flipped upside down. Love thy neighbor, embrace the stranger, loyalty, deep loyalty. These are his ethics. And he was politically engaged. He wasn't just in Palestine and thinking about the Algerian War, because he was a tourist of revolutions. No, these are commitments. He is full on in support of the Palestinian cause. Full on. He saw Shatila in 1982. He was there as a journalist. The refugee camp where hundreds, thousands of people were killed by the phalangists, which were supported by the IDF. That was what got him to write Prisoner of Love. So he's in Palestine and living in Lebanon, refugee camps, when the PLO and other different factions are, Fatah and others, are fighting with Lebanon, fighting with the IDF, fighting with Israel. They're fighting within factions. Genet sees the danger of fundamentalism, because there was a very strong sectarian element among Christians and Muslims in the Palestinian liberation movement. Genet sees it all unfolding. Genet even says, I love the Palestinians. I believe in their cause, but if they get a state, I might abandon them. This is his renunciation. He hates states with good reason. I'm not a fan of it myself. He hates the nation state. Yeah, and I'm like an internationalist. I'm still an internationalist and a cosmopolitan, a rootless cosmopolitan who lives 20 minutes away from the hospital when she was born. Crown Heights. Prisoner of Love is an extraordinary book. He goes to the Palestinian, after the screens, he doesn't know what to do. I think there's something like 107 characters in the screen, it's not probably going to be 137. It's a completely unproducible play. There are riots in Paris. His meditation on the Algerian Revolution and France's colonial role, but also what happens to the revolution? What happens when you get a state? Do you take the form of the state? Do you adopt the form of its legislature? These are questions that are beyond me. Right now I'm looking for escasis. What is escasis? In Prisoner of Love, Jean Genet is smitten with Hamza. Hamza is a young Fedayeen, a young freedom fighter. And when Hamza goes off to fight, Genet stays in the apartment with Hamza's mother. And in the distance, you can hear the battle. You can hear bombs going off. That's Lebanon. You can hear bombs going off. And there's a knock at the door. Genet is sleeping in Hamza's bed in the apartment Hamza shares with his mother. And the knock on the door is Hamza's mother, who brings him a cup of coffee. And there's Genet with the mother. Hamza and his mother are Christ and the Pietà. It's Mary and Christ. And Genet, who's far older than Hamza, is now in the position of Hamza. receiving the love of the mother that the ward of the state never received. And this image, and Genet was very much into the power of the image. This is the image, the abiding image in Prisoner of Love, but it's throughout all the novels. That figure of the oppressed femme Genet's connection to identifying as that figure is a collapse of subject and object. And there's a process put into place of understanding how I can possibly understands all of the conflicting impulses within myself, recognize and embrace them to the end of acting both ethically and politically. Genet weighs the hand of the handshake. He sees the color of the skin of the person he's looking at. He doesn't shy away from difference. He understands desire. Did it actually happen? Who knows? Are these autobiographies? Not exactly. Are these novels? Well, they're stories. I think they're processes. There are many features. How you doing? Good. Yeah? Am I making sense? Yeah. We got time. I got time. You got time? Yeah, there are a number of other aspects about Genet in the novels that are kind of important to understand that relate to transgressive literature. This is a part of my project. I mean, I need to think about Genet's relationship to this whole other category of literature I was interested in called transgressive literature. It means like getting my 3 volumes of the collected works of Marquis de Sade off the shelf. And lots of other literature. De Sade was really important to anti-fascist thinking after the war. How many people have read the Marquis de Sade? 120 Days of Sodom, Juliet. De Sade is hard to read. Probably get a few witnesses on that among the people who read de Sade. When I was younger, I also started reading de Sade when I was 19, along with The Story of the Eye by George Bataille. That was, again, mandatory decadent literature for my generation. But the transgressive literature, the literature of the libertine's a slave. The libertine is not free. The libertine is a slave to their desire. And so much of what Genet faces is unbidden. These are not choices. Genet's ascesis is about recognizing the choices the choices that unfold from being honest about his desires to himself. Rather than denying it and repressing it, which is largely the work of fascism. The manosphere is all about repression, denial, right? And enforcing that denial on others seeing others as a means entirely and not ends in and of ourselves. Genet identifies as the underclass, a transnational underclass that has features of sexuality, gender, race, ethnicity, and nationality. A transnational underclass that does not recognize national boundaries. When Genet goes to the first reformatory, Mettray, as a teenager, he has to tell the warden what his name is, Genet, and in the reformatory, which used to be a church, which is now basically a prison for youth, Genet announces his name, Genet, and says, oh, the warden or guard says, Plantin Genet, which is the name of an aristocrat who's buried in the former church. I've been thinking a lot about this constellation. I think we have to unpack this. It's a little bit of a, forgive me, it's a little bit of a detour, but I really want to think out loud about this for a little bit. So we have a constellation of like the working class, underclass, the bourgeois, and the aristocracy. Now the bourgeois are the mercantile class of Europe in the 17th and 18th century. Right? They're merchants, and they achieve wealth that rivals the wealth of the aristocracy. The aristocracy's wealth is based on land. Land is the origin of capital, says Marx, and I accept that. And by the time of the mercantile, the rise of the mercantile class in the 17th and 18th century in Europe, when the bourgeois achieve the status of wealth through trade, and they don't have land, or are not transmitting their wealth through blood relations like the aristocracy, there's this opportunity where the working class and the aristocracy both hate on the bourgeois, which is really interesting. Charles Ludlam, one of my heroes, the leader of the theater of the ridiculous, said, only the bourgeois take off their clothes and get naked to have sex. I love that. That's an insight into understanding how the aristocracy and the underclass don't share the values of the bourgeois. At the same time, it's the aristocracy who's the fascists. You've seen Salò by Pier Paolo Pasolini, which is a cinematic version of 120 Days of Sodom. You've read De Sade, perhaps. This is the thing about literature. I'm going to swing back into literature. I'm going far out to come back to literature and the forms of literature, because this is going to end on a kind of aesthetic set of claims. So in De Sade, when you read De Sade, like when I was a teenager, we used to just read it for the naughty bits, right? Like the philosophy was really boring, and you had to like wade through it and then abandon it, and you would just go to the orgy scenes. And the orgy scenes are, now I'm just rehearsing Roulette Bar. Sade foyer little. The orgy scenes are impossible. They're ridiculous. No human can contort themselves into that. You cannot contort your body so that every orifice is occupied in that way in a pile of 20 bodies. Impossible. It's a fantasy. And so's the philosophy. The form of the philosophical arguments that the libertines make, that is the aristocratic, the masturbatory fantasies of the aristocracy, is the writing is paradigmatically the same as the orgy scenes. That's what's so fascinating about Assad's literature. And that's something I think we have to think about in relationship to Genet. Thank you for your patience. I realize, now we're getting to the end. I haven't exceeded an hour, but we're getting to the end. There's a number of things about these novels, this literature. There's no big finale. This is a constellation of thoughts, but there's a number of things as a writer I'm thinking about. The novels of Genet, well, first I have to say, I can't, this is the dangerous part. I have to say, we are living in this time. Epstein is taken from the pages of Assad. The Epstein files are the fascistic fantasies exercised as sexualized violence. That's what's so urgent and interesting about transgressive literature now, is we're living it. Right? This image of a network of people who operate with impunity because of their obscene wealth. And this is why I feel like it's dangerous. Like, I'm even afraid to say that name out loud at a lecture. I also think that's, in some ways that has to do with, I read all of this stuff under the politics of desire, which we got from feminists. That was the powerful leverage of feminism that linked queer politics and feminist politics with the understanding that patriarchy is responsible for sexism and homophobia, understanding all of these linkages, how these things are connected, how we can conjugate our thinking in such a way that we can find alliance. I think these are the urgent concerns of both ethics and politics for me. They manifest in aesthetics in the way that Genet writes. Genet, the author, is a character. The author, as a character, encompasses all of the characters within the book. It's Genet. It's not the omniscient writer or the omniscient eye, God's eye view of the 19th century novel. Right? It's existential, and this is what's really interesting to me, is trying to figure out, and mine again, look at, and again, it's for me, I don't know if you're doing this. If you are, please let me know. The value of existentialism, which places us in that second sphere of anti-fascist activity. Remember, the first sphere is publicly saying, we dissent. But just as important, historically, is understanding how we have desires, ambitions, and aims, and drives that need to be understood, not policed, not repressed. Process. I'm so into process. What's the process? The how do we face fascism, has no answer. That's the answer for me at the moment. The question, how do we meet fascism? How do we live, not only under it, but within it? And how does that structure our engagement with ourselves and others, because we are other to ourselves? Questions, no answers, only questions. Thank you.